Hello, I am Richard Painting and I'm here to introduce you to a method for breaking through your organisation's performance barriers, many of which you may have come to accept as natural limits. This method or tool is called the Design Structure or Dependency Structure method, which is generally abbreviated to simply DSM. I and many others believe it to be one of the most significant improvements in managing enterprise-wide that has occurred in the last 20 years. DSM's effectiveness comes from its ability to give us previously unobtainable insight into risk and problem structures, along with the adaptiveness required to minimize or eliminate their effects. We are all aware that managing the program, business and manufacturing activities that occur inside our organizations has progressively become more complex and difficult to deal with than they used to be. Business cycles have become shorter and the business environment much more competitive and complex than in the past. There is plenty of evidence that our tools are overwhelmed and losing their ability to manage the fast-moving and complex situations we have to deal with. Cost and time overruns are often in the 50 to 100% range, and we regularly are blindsided by issues that seem to come out of nowhere. Typically something has fallen through the cracks that retrospectively we realize we should have been on top of. To make matters worse, it is very difficult to respond to these daily crises rapidly without incurring significant unintended consequences, which turn out to be nearly as bad as the problem we were trying to fix in the first place. In large part, these breakdowns in our processes are due to the fact that most of our current tools look at business or program management as a relatively linear process where A leads to B and then on to C, albeit with some phase gates in between. The reality of today's business and innovation programs is that they are relatively complex systems where the information flows through a web structure, not a relatively linear pipeline. The failure to recognize and manage this reality is the precursor of poor performance, because in the end, reality almost always wins. Our current tools typically manage only about 60% of the information flows that occur in our programs. As bad as this sounds, it's actually the good news, because the bad news is that 40-odd% that we are currently missing is where the large percentage of surprises and risks that we run into daily reside. What is needed is a tool which provides a much more complete view of our programs, what the military calls situational visibility on a battlefield. Back in the 1960s, Don Stewart and others started working on developing DSM to provide the situational visibility, control and adaptiveness that is required to manage complex, fast-moving programs. Over the last 20 years, the DSM process has been further developed by some of the world's great universities and corporations. Initially, DSM was applied only in large corporations, primarily in the automotive and aerospace sectors. 20 years ago, the software required to make using the DSM method practical was proprietary for the most part, or it was cheap and cumbersome, not anything hard-pressed teams were prepared to work with. Today, many vendors have really good and relatively inexpensive software for implementing DSM, all the way from large corporations down to the SMEs. Given industry's obvious need for a much more capable tool, and their becoming available, the global DSM community saw the need to form a non-profit group in 2011 to facilitate the introduction of DSM to industry worldwide. The webinar we are introducing you to in this presentation was designed by this group to get you started on your DSM journey.